Hey everybody, Cori here. So I'm here today to film a really quick video about some of my favorite things. And if you didn't know, something about me is I have a huge book collection. I've been collecting books most of my entire life. I read a lot of books in a month, sometimes up to 30. And the way I go about getting these books, typically, there's a lot of ways I get books. I buy them new, I buy them used, and I also buy a lot from thrift stores or charity shops, whatever you call them. I love going thrifting. It's one of my favorite things to do. I find it just so fun to find treasures in the shelves in these stores, and I'm lucky where I live to have a lot of good thrift stores around me. So I thought I'd come in today and share some of the most exciting books to me that I have found at thrift stores. Now, as I mentioned, I obviously do, I love supporting authors and I do buy quite a few books new, but the way I've found some of my favorite books that I've ever read has been because I could buy them for $1 at a thrift store, whereas I would never have picked them up before. So these are some of the coolest, to me, books that I have found in my thrift store hunting days. First up, I have a very exciting one, and it's very popular in the book community, and that is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Now, I actually did read a different edition of this. I think I have 3 editions of this book before finding this one, but this is actually a hardcover first edition of the book that I found in a thrift store for like not more than $2, so was so thrilled to find this. It has a little bit of a rip in the dust jacket, but I don't mind. As a collector, this was just such a cool thing to see, and as somebody who's just such a huge fan of V.E. Schwab, it's definitely one that I love seeing on my shelves. Next up is one that I've talked a lot about here recently on the channel, and that is Ragged Company by Richard Wagamese. Now, I actually didn't even find this in a thrift store. I found this in a little free library. I had never read Richard Wagamese before. I had never heard of this book, but it was in a little free library by my house, so I took it home and I read it and I absolutely fell in love with it. If you haven't heard me talk about it before, it's about a group of homeless people living in the city, and they are kind of this found family, and one night they get together and pool their money to go see a movie to get out from the cold, and they start to befriend this not retired, but ex-journalist, and their story goes from there, and they one day find a lottery ticket in the street, and it turns out that they win $13 million. It's incredible. It's an incredible book. I love it. It was my favorite book of 2020. Top of my top. Highly recommend. And I got it in a little free library. Amazing. Next up is a book that I believe was my favorite of 2019? Or 2018? I think 2019. And that is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I found this beautiful hardcover edition at the thrift store. This is actually, again, not the edition I read, but the first edition that I did have was a paperback from the thrift store. Again, from the thrift store, the first one I read. I've since passed that on to a friend because I found this beautiful, tall, big, chunky hardcover edition for my shelves. This is, again, turns out, it seems like my favorite books are heartbreaking. Ragged Company also made me cry multiple times. A Little Life is not. I understand why some people don't like this book. It is very sad, but I also found it quite hopeful and impactful, and it's lovely. It's a lovely, lovely book. Oh, I should say that so far all of the books I've talked about are definitely adult novels. Just throwing that one out there. I still read a ton of YA, do not get me wrong, but sometimes finding these big, like expensive, this is a $35 book for a couple bucks at the thrift store is just so thrilling, and one of my favorite books of all time. Next up is kind of a little weird one, but that is this little Life Before Legend by Marie Lu. So this is a little like prequel novella to the Legend series by Marie Lu, which I love, and I think this was only ever available in paperback in a box set of Legend, which I don't have. I don't even know how I've managed to see this book in a thrift store because it is so tiny, the spine, but yeah, this is a little prequel novella that I love, and it's just perfect for me as a collector to have in my collection, and I didn't ever think I would own it, and now I do, and I'm so thrilled. I love Marie Lu. I've read all of her books, and they're all fantastic. Next up is another big, chunky adult hardcover, and it is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I've read not all of Murakami's work, but a lot of it. And this is a book that I found in a thrift store when I kind of first was starting to get back into reading several years ago. I kind of stopped reading. I hadn't been reading a lot for a few years. I was mostly reading nonfiction here and there, and then I think it was 2013, 2014, I just like dove back into reading. And that was mostly because I was able to find books at a thrift store. This is definitely a time in my life where I didn't have any disposable income to spend on books. So when I found this, I hadn't read any Murakami since I was in Japan as a teenager. I lived there for a year, if you didn't know, and I had read some Murakami while I lived there, but then finding this at the thrift store, and this book is heavy, by the way, you could don't drop this one on your face. I was just so thrilled to be able to get back into his work. This is a dystopian novel set in the year 1984, following a couple people named Aomame and Tengo. And it's just the story of how there is something just not quite right happening in Tokyo. Something just seems a little off. And I believe Aomame believes she is existing in like a parallel universe, which she calls Q. Again, it's been several years since I read this, but I really remember just really enjoying it while I did. It is a chunky one, and for sure a bit intimidating, I think, but it was just at a time in my life where I had no reading expectations. It's kind of a different world now. Reading expectations for myself, and I could just really slowly work through books, and yeah, this is one I found at a thrift store, and I would never have read it had I not. Also, can we talk about this cool cover? It's really hard to see on camera, but it's like a see-through cover. It's awesome. Next up is another one that is special to me only because I found it again when I was first getting back into reading, and specifically getting into reading YA. I had never really read YA before. I think I had maybe read a couple John Green books, but it wasn't something I was typically reaching for. But at the thrift store, I think this was just like, I think Karina had recently read it, but I found this book, and it's Cinder by Marissa Meyer in this very weird edition. This is published by Scholastic, and Cinder is actually typically published by Macmillan, I want to say, but this is like a school market version. So this, I viscerally remember this was 75 cents, and this is what got me into reading the Lunar Chronicles series. So this is kind of, it doesn't match the rest of the series. It's this weird little tiny edition that is kind of out of left field, but just I was so fond of this book because I remember just, I think I was like texting Karina as I found it, being like, I found it for 75 cents, and her being excited for me. So it's just, again, one of those books that I found and was just so excited to read back in a time when reading felt new to me. And last but not least, I have a very exciting book. This is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. I, again, own multiple editions. I think all of the other ones I actually bought new. But this one I found at the thrift store, and this is a first edition hardcover of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Again, this one's a little beat up, but I just don't care. This is for my collection. It's not for, I have no intention of ever selling this book. But as it's one of my favorite books of all time, and I'm just so enamored with this story, I've reread it. It's so great, and I just remember like getting this like sense of like euphoria when I found it on a shelf in a thrift store. I just like kind of like reaching for it on the shelf. Again, I think it might have been $2, if not less. Such a good find for me. I was so excited, and I'm still so excited to have this in my book collection. Alright, so those were some of my favorite thrift store bookish finds. I have many other books that I've bought from the thrift store. I just find it so much fun, and I tend to pick up titles that maybe I never would have, just because they sound interesting to me. Again, I'm very fortunate to live in an area that has quite a few thrift stores around me, and I just find joy in going to these places and getting treasures for my bookshelves. Alright everybody, thank you for watching this video. If you have any favorite thrift store finds, please leave them in the comments down below. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Happy reading, and thanks for being awesome. Goodbye!